I love the concept of mentorship, period. I think it's such an engaging and productive form of teaching. Rules should only be in place to positively serve a cause. Having rules that are a detriment to everybody's productivity is not even worth having in a way, because you're hampering people from being able to actually produce and contribute to a production. Specifically for the GSM role, something that I've thought about is I do feel like there needs to be a bit more of an elevation in terms of the knowledge that they're given.
Welcome to the Theatre Art Life Podcast, and hello, we're putting the spotlight on those who create live entertainment around the globe, the culture creators, the backstage masters. My name is Anna Aguilera.
And my name is Anna Robb. On this episode, we'll be talking to Nathan Grimoulas, who is also a very good friend of mine, about stage management.
Nathan is a stage manager with broad international experience, most recently working as a general stage manager for Cirque du Soleil's Cusa. Welcome, Nathan.
Hey guys, it's so great to be here. I've been so excited to do more podcast and webinar stuff with Theatre Art Life, so it's really nice to get a one-on-two like this.
And tell us right now where you are in the world talking to us.
I am from Chicago right now. Been here for the past few months since touring on Cusa was closed, as were everything entertainment-wise. It's such an interesting time to kind of be watching and experiencing and listening to the conversations people are having about our craft and what we do, seeing as we can't actually practice it. But it's been nice to be in the States. There's also a lot of stuff going on here at the moment, which is really nice to be a part of and witness all of those conversations. It's definitely definitely a really interesting time.
So digging into the details of our craft that we speak of, tell us in your terms, what is a stage manager and what does a stage manager do?
I love this question because a lot of the time these questions are asked amongst stage managers themselves, and it's like if you knew what you were doing, you think you wouldn't have to ask the question. But for some reason, it comes up, and I love it because it means that for me, I think I kind of step back from the nitty-gritty tasks and details of the job. It's kind of like the idea to question the job itself, I think, is intrinsically part of the nature of a really strong stage manager, someone who is an apt listener, someone who practices critical thinking, a lot of judgment making and passing really productive and kind of conducive judgments as well to a production. So as an individual, for me, a stage manager is someone who is kind of aware that they're in a place that is always changing, something that's more reactive. And I guess what they bring to the plate is the ability to just really understand a production in front of them, understand the different natures of the people that they work with within either artistic departments or technical departments and cast, and kind of really being able to read situation and pass kind of not as non-biased as possible judgments to kind of get things done as they need to get done, whether that's in show, out of show, pre-planning, creations, all that kind of stuff.
So you judge, but you don't judge.
In a way, yeah. I guess for me, I've been thinking about this quite a lot. It's kind of like this idea of, it's a conversation that happens where we say, we don't want to pass judgment, or we don't want to be judgmental, and we don't want to kind of have preconceived notions and thoughts about things. But I kind of realized at some point along the way that actually that honing the ability to make judgments, because making judgments is inevitable. That's what you're doing. You have a bunch of variables, you have a bunch of problems, a bunch of scenarios, and you kind of have to calculate, and sometimes ahead of time, based on probabilities of risk and kind of the nature of the market that you're in, if you're touring, or the size of the production, you do have to judge like moment to moment and kind of trust that your ability to do so is going to be conducive to the whole. So it's kind of in some way like a selfless judgmental perspective, if that even makes sense.
Well, I think you're judging the situation, not judging the people or the things around you. You're not sort of, the word judgment has a very sort of negative connotation to it. I think it may be the wrong word to use, but the judgment is taking the day-to-day circumstances and moving the show forward with your best judgment, as opposed to judging other people. That's certainly not the premise of it. But no, it's interesting because, it is such a very varied role, and you do have to sit on your morals and also your way of working to hang on to it as you make decisions moving forward, and it's for the best of the production, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely worth noting that stage managers are not in a position to just be terrible people who cast judgment on people. For sure. I guess talking more about like the kind of the person of like who the stage manager is rather than what they do brought to mind ideas of qualities that help or have helped me kind of sustain this position within the industry, because I know that a lot of people can kind of pass through stage management on their way to something else, or they can fall back on it from something else that was a main. And I think something that's really shone brightly out of the qualities of a stage manager would definitely be resilience. Just to be able to, even though we try to have a work-life balance, we try to, instill breaks throughout the day or try to somehow kind of manage our workload week to week, there definitely has to be a tenacity for quite a lot of resilience, because it's inevitable that you're going to have moments of conflict, you're going to have moments of really unexpected things coming your way that you just have to power through, and you kind of don't really have a choice. When it comes to the crunch, you do have to just power through sometimes. So I think that resilience to be able to take all of that on, but also again that backseat of it doesn't really reflect anything on you. You just have the appropriate skills to be able to dig everyone out of the problem that they're in and kind of continually, I guess, allow everything to float up.
So you're speaking about like how people pass through stage management, but you also came from a sound background, right? And
this
then you
is very true. This is very, very true. I guess my first involvement in anything that had to do with live entertainment on a stage would probably have been back in high school. I played piano, and me and my music partner at the time, his name was Paul, he played drums. We did this little piano drum duo, and I loved being on stage, and it was really fun to do that. But the thing that really piqued my interest was everything that was happening behind the scenes. The consoles being set up, the speaker arrays, how kind of the sound worked in the auditorium, all that kind of stuff. And I thought, well, I thought that would be my path. I applied and got into a technical college before finishing my high school certificate. So I focused hard on music and English, but I kind of bummed out of the like maths and science stuff, because I thought, I know what my future is going to be. And oh man, maybe second year into that course, it was kind of like, is this actually right for me? I had to ask myself the question, like, I'm not as good as this as other people. So should this really be something that I should be pursuing? Even though I love the craft, not being good at something doesn't really give you that kind of perpetual joy out of doing something that you excel at or doing something you succeed in, because either you have a natural knack or you've worked really hard to attain the skills to continue to thrive in that, I guess, facet of the industry. So yeah, sound was short-lived, but I worked a little bit after I finished college for a few months at a reception center, and I thought to myself, never again. It was just like praise be to all those soundies out there, because it was tough. It was really tough. And I thought at that time I was kind of working in radio a little bit as well, doing some podcast and editing work. And through that, I started volunteering at some of the live gigs that were happening through the radio station. And I kind of saw this stage management thing that I had no idea about. I hadn't really Googled what the job was. I hadn't met or heard of anyone who was a stage manager before, and kind of just got roped in from like the underground culture scene, and just started to build up from there and kind of understand that there were a lot of things to learn from a technical perspective in terms of jargon and kind of the discipline itself. But I really felt that my nature was really allowing me to kind of propel through that in terms of being very compassionate, very listening, and very open to other people's ideas, and really considering the production a collaboration rather than one person who controls every aspect of it. It really is teamwork. And I think that's something that I've kind of carried through, even though I may not have come from like an educated background in terms of stage management and theatre arts.
What do you see as your attributes that took you through from, beginning stage manager, and now obviously you're a general stage manager, so you're kind of ahead of a team of stage management with Cirque du Soleil. So that's quite a trajectory in quite a relatively short time. And what do you? I already know the answer to this question because I can answer for you, but I'm going to ask you, in your opinion, what do you see there was about yourself that made you go from that level right up to one of the sort of leading positions in the entertainment industry?
It is a dense path, but it's a path worth traveling. And definitely, to point out one little part of that question, was that it definitely was in a relatively short period of time. I remember kind of first starting out doing like small stuff in Sydney, like little gigs, and then I remember the first time I got to work on Splendor in the Grass, which was like massive music festival, Northern New South Wales, like really, really beautiful experience. And I thought, wow, like I didn't expect to be carried by the industry in the way that I was, just by being valued and valuing the people that I was working with. And it's a tight-knit community in entertainment in Australia. Really being surrounded by the people that you want to work with really kind of helped kind of ease me into it. But then once things got really serious, once I left Australia to Macau to join House of Dancing Water, that was like small fish in a gigantic pond. It was like this crazy step up. And then from there, to have taken the opportunities that I'm so grateful to have been given, it was kind of, everything kind of does hang on this pivot point where I realized that there was something fundamental in me, not necessarily that needed to change, but I would say it was more of a shift, like kind of a shift of perspective of who I was and who the people were around me, a kind of understanding of so many things are so much bigger than just us. Almost everything is bigger than just us as an individual. So kind of, I guess there was an element of maturation in terms of understanding what I could contribute, but also trusting myself and being confident in that the ideas that I had and the decisions that I was making were actually the best decisions that could be made. And I think that was a huge hurdle of confidence, because I kind of always needed a little bit of reassurance that I was on the right track in terms of what I was doing. I kind of really liked getting feedback from superiors, and that was a really common thread throughout all of my working history. But once I could kind of step out of that and realize that I knew enough, I could trust myself enough, I just needed to focus on that and shift my perspective to just be looking at that rather than being overly social and kind of thinking of work as maybe a second at times, or kind of thinking less about the direct responsibility of a stage manager because I worked in such a large team, and really kind of starting to own my own things, but also the things of those around me, owning all of the decisions of the artistic department, understanding that we needed to be a cohesive whole, standing by each other and helping each other solve problems. It was kind of a very different perspective from kind of just not just like following orders and not really thinking for yourself, but I guess just thinking about things on a deeper level. I don't know if I can go further with that. It's somewhat abstract, which I found very interesting for a craft that can be quite mathematical and literal. We're dealing with schedules, dealing with kind of routine performances or schedule changes, that kind of stuff. So I found that really interesting.
So you mentioned that the people that were around you were a big influence, and like people above you you would be turning to them to ask for question and feedback. What are your thoughts on mentoring? Like, would you look at them as mentors? Would you look at other people around you and try to help them out?
I love the concept of mentorship, period. I think it's such an engaging and productive form of teaching. Firstly, I would definitely draw the distinction like of like the mentee mentor relationship. Something that's close but I think is often confused is this idea of like the trainer and trainee relationship, or a traineeship versus a mentorship kind of thing. And I guess one's potentially like way more formal than the other, but I think in a kind of a trainee situation, your main goals are imparting actual knowledge that someone needs and giving someone the tools so that they kind of know the way that something, the way that more of a cause and effect kind of teaching method, whereas mentoring is kind of like a bit more steering someone in a certain direction, but really that direction is ultimately for them to be able to make their own decisions. You don't want to be making decisions for the mentee, but you want to kind of be encouraging them to think about things and drawing their own conclusions from the facts that are around them. You want to help like illuminate those things around them. So I think I was so lucky to have Anna as my boss, because that was like a real treat, because that was exactly her approach to teaching. It was very much, I remember I never really got called into the office for a certain show call, because if I did something a bit on the, if I did something not quite right, I would be in her office straight away, because I would want to just talk about my experience of having been through that with her, to then kind of understand why I myself got to that point. So to try and understand how I could improve, rather than what's the right answer in this situation. And kind of I felt that was really invited, because I knew that our relationship was definitely more of that on that mentor level. So yeah, not so much asking for direct answers, but kind of helping me realize what already was true, if that kind of makes sense as well.
Yeah, and I think that the fascinating part, and also as a manager, I also learnt as we, from you and also the other people that were in the department. I think when I first began to be a stage manager, it was like, this is the way to be a stage manager, and that's the way we move forward. And when you manage a team for a long period of time, you realize that that's impossible for people to live in the model of the way that you stage manage. So what's a fascinating evolution of that is helping other stage managers forge a path that's not necessarily identical to how you stage manage or whatever, but to double down on the strengths that they do have, and create a cohesive team within that environment. And it's interesting because, when you've got a bunch of stage managers, and you don't always have that luxury on smaller shows, you've got one or two people, but when you've got a bunch, you're creating a dynamic between everybody's skills and their strengths and weaknesses, and creating a balance within all of those things. But it's just an interesting thing, because that's what I think, it's really hard to define stage management, because each person has to bring a lot of themselves to that job. It's not just I program lights, or it's a very intangible craft, in the fact that how it gets done is a reflection of that person. And that's why you really need to allow people to have their own path, because they won't feel comfortable in a path that you're digging out for them. You're just sort of clearing the trees, and then they're going to find the path themselves.
For sure. And I think after what we mentioned before about that kind of pivot point of maturation, that kind of lent me towards really following stage management, I guess we could really sum it up as just taking it more seriously. I guess that would probably be the easiest, most colloquial way to wrap that up. But GSMing on Kusa was kind of what you were saying just then, when you're putting together a team, and we weren't massive by any means, but we were a team of two, and then we had fly-in. So more often than not, we would have a 3-person team, because it was a large show, and we were afforded that luxury. Some shows, some big tubs weren't. They had to deal with just a GSM and an SM. So we were lucky when we had the third. And when we did have the 3, it was kind of a really interesting experience, because I think me by nature, naturally, I'm a bit of a rule breaker, and not in the way where it's like I'm intentionally breaking rules for the thrill of it, but I understand that rules should only be in place to positively serve a cause. Having rules that are a detriment to everybody's productivity is not even worth having, in a way, because you're hampering people from being able to actually produce and contribute to a production. So I found little things like who collected the sign-in sheet, whether it was attached to certain tracks or plots backstage, or who did the lineup board versus who imported data to Aurora. Kind of in a 2-person team, this was very, very obvious, because you didn't really have time to mess around with that, because someone always had to call, someone always had to be backstage. So we almost never had shows off, for as an example, and we had trainings and office stuff to do during the day. But with 3, all of a sudden it became this thing of like, well, that rule applies to this kind of, I guess, paradigm. And so if we have a different paradigm, we can completely break and change the rules to make them more productive and better serve us, so that people can have longer breaks, people can start later, people can have more productive shows off to actually get stuff done that needs to be done because we're only in a city for 5 weeks. Kind of understanding where people's strengths were was definitely what I realized as kind of the main aim of the GSM, which was appropriately kind of place people where they need to be, where they can flourish, and where their kind of skills are highlighted. So not only will they do great work, but everyone will recognize them for the great work that they're doing, but also allow for that to be a conversation and collaboration. Someone might reveal that they really don't like doing a certain task, and they know they'll do it if there's no other option. But if we can make it so they don't have to do that, then that's fine. And if you're trialing something city to city, I found that it was much easier in touring to be able to play with these, because by the time you leave a city and go to the next one, you're so slammed by that first pre-production and premiere week that you kind of just do whatever's easiest and whatever's best to get through. And then again, you have this moment of, how did that work last city? How will it work this city? The hours of the shows are different. Our kind of between show time is different. So will it work again? And then all of a sudden you're fostering this kind of, collaborative energy where everyone feels like they just own the production in front of them, and people can contribute the skills that they want to contribute, because everyone knows when they're better at something than someone else is. I know it's kind of a bit crude to say that, and we definitely don't kind of say that in an open setting in an office. But I think in not a negative way to disrespect other people around us, but we know what our strengths are. It's a question in interviews when you go for a job. Like we inherently know those things, and when you have the opportunity to showcase them, you're going to do a great job, and everyone else is going to see that you're enjoying what you're doing as well. So it's interesting what you mentioned about that, putting a team together and having people kind of bounce off each other and creating that environment around you, because I think it spirals up into so many positive things.
Absolutely. I think it's the real foundation of a successful team, and then, ultimately a successful, well-functioning show if stage management are at the center of it, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So on safety, what do you think? And obviously Cirque du Soleil and even House of Dancing Water, we dealt with a lot of aspects that were surrounding safety, and that is a level up and a skill that is not as, everybody has to deal with safety in any realm of theatrical work, but I think the stakes are much higher in the circus realm, So what do you see your role as a stage manager in enforcing safety? And I realize that probably that might vary from company to company in terms of how involved stage management is in that. So tell us about that.
For sure. This one's, I think this is kind of in terms of the nitty gritty details of what a stage manager is responsible for. I think it has to be highlighted as easily the most important. I think just from my experiences of different kinds of accidents and tragedies that have happened in the industry and that are an intrinsic part of circus. I'm speaking on circus specifically. It's kind of a very intrinsic part of how we approach every single situation. Kind of risk and safety is first and foremost, just because of the nature of what people are doing on stage. And I think as a stage manager, there's this interesting feeling of being very deeply and inherently responsible for things that happen on that stage. We have the word stage in the title of our jobs as just from a really simple place. And so I think there's two things at play. There's what we actually are responsible for, or based on our production and based on the people that work around us, how we appropriately delegate the responsibility, but also the authority when it comes to safety, when it comes to making decisions, when it comes to steering projects like integrations or any kind of technical change out, for example. And then on the other side, there's the personal aspect of how responsible do you feel personally as a person just doing their job, being in a position that would be filled by absolutely anyone else. So I think for me, there's kind of that, I guess that's my baseline. That's where I start from. There's a sense of individually, I'm kind of somewhat detached. Otherwise, I feel like my involvement would supersede what I am actually are authorized to contribute because we have technical directors, we have heads of departments, we have artistic departments, artistic directors, we have the artist that's putting themselves at risk. It might be their apparatus, it might be a purchased apparatus. There are like so many different variables and individuals that it's kind of like a very, very thick web. And I think coming to that web with the clear head of somewhat with a step back as I need to kind of implement what my duty is here rather than what I think I should be implementing. And I think that's a good baseline. And then from there, it kind of does evolve into kind of more ethical and moral questions, I guess, when it comes to, for example, acts being cancelled during intermission for Act 2, I think was one that I particularly had to deal with a lot, that I didn't have experience with, as Dancing Water was only a one-act show. It was just 1.5 hour performance. So kind of having variables change but in the middle of the show and how that impacts people's safety in terms of just their ability to focus on well-being, and then also understanding how adaptable different performers are from each other was a really big moment where it was kind of like, well, one blanket fits all might not always be the most apt solution, because people respond differently to receiving notes at the time that they've just come off stage, versus receiving notes just before they went on stage or something like that. So people are kind of really, really different. And I think, well, I'll speak for me, actually. I won't generalize too much, because I think it's a very, it's just an interesting subject that everyone has a different opinion on. For me, I kind of feel that safety goes from the individual, the personal well-being of the performer, let's say, as an example, and kind of their state and how where they're at in terms of what they're contributing, all the way up to the maintenance and upkeep of the equipment that they're using and the theatre that they're operating within. So it's a really, really huge kind of breadth, I guess, of variables there to take note of. And for me personally, I might not immediately know what's going on in someone's personal life just because there are so many people on a show, and I tend to be a little bit of a private person as well, and I respect other people's privacy too. However, I know that I have resources like an artistic director or an artistic coordinator, an assistant AD, something like that might know people more intimately, so that when something comes up that involves a certain group of people or an individual, I can harness these resources to know more. And I feel like knowing the most that you can is the best that you can do when it comes to safety. It's just knowing as much as you can and cover as many of those variables as possible, and definitely collaborate with other people that know more than you do in their given avenue, whether that's a technician or whether that's the spouse of a performer that you happen to be friends with, as another example. Like, it's kind of, I feel like it's, personally, that's what I think. I think there is somewhat innate kind of responsibility to know as much as you can, and then make judgments based on a specific situation to decide whether it's safe or unsafe in collaboration with other people that have the technical knowledge, that have other intrinsic knowledge that you might not be privy to as well. So there's those two layers, I guess. I guess that's just a very personal kind of perspective on it.
I think, though, for me, it's kind of like there's almost three layers. You've got your training and the safety procedures and the standard operating procedures and all of the technical things that you're supposed to do when something goes wrong, right? Especially from a safety perspective. What's on paper, right? And that's a great foundation, and it's worthwhile. And then you've got the situation that you're talking about with knowing the show and knowing the cast and knowing maybe somebody's personal situation and the environment in which that decision in terms of safety has to take place. And then there's you as an individual with your depth and breadth of history, your experience, and your what you're bringing to the table to make that judgment. So, and obviously the top one, where your response to that situation is based on basically those three things, the foundational training. Because, like, how many times have we looked at a standard operating procedure and then something happens in a show and that, like, you may as well throw that SOP out the window. Like, it doesn't mean anything because it's it's a completely new situation. But there are steps in that SOP that even if the rules change, you still go through those steps and you work through that situation from another perspective, and that foundation is important. And I feel like it's sometimes everybody feels that those foundations are very laborious and stuff, but you can't underestimate what that innate foundation it does give you when you're faced with a new situation.
Absolutely.
And then like knowing everybody on that second level and knowing the current situation or that given nuance in that particular city for that particular show with that particular equipment and that particular setup, and that person's coming back from an ankle injury and et cetera, all of that compounds. And then there's you making those judgments as in terms of based on your experience. And I think the more that you do that, and you probably find that as well, is the more that you are in that position to make those judgments and make those calls, the more exposure you have to that, the more comfortable you are with assuming that position from a safety perspective. Would you agree?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's exactly like exercising a muscle for fitness. Like going through those situations and being exposed to moments where you do have to kind of break stuff apart and rebuild it really, really quickly is what gives you that kind of elasticity to just really react to situations, which is super, super beneficial if you're calling a show. That's like where that ability to bounce off information that you've just been exposed to, whether that's visual, oral, anything, the ability to construct something to just react quickly and justly and neatly can really only come with a lot of repetition in some kind of way. What you mentioned before about foundation was definitely triggered something in me, which was the idea that, as well as some people may be thinking it's kind of like sometimes they might be super boring or like super convoluted or whatnot, and there's always an opportunity to change an operating procedure if it does seem to be kind of hindering people to be able to perform a rescue, obviously something like that. Kind of disregarding the SOP and tending to go off script more often also is kind of at the detriment to everyone else, because an SOP is kind of so broad reaching in terms of all of the departments that kind of play a role inside this bigger narrative of when an emergency happens on stage. Let's say everyone has a task to perform, and it's almost like our responsibility to honor those tasks, because it triggers other people to do certain things as well, and it keeps the energy calm when everyone knows what they need to do and does those things. Really, like that's kind of, I think, what really keeps the energy calm. And I guess as the stage manager, once for me anyway, like the initial roll off of the procedure has happened, kind of how it was happening in Cirque was we would facilitate the show stop as safely as possible, kind of bring everything to a halt. Certain things get said on comms, people react to those things, they go on stage, lights change, everything goes on. And then from that point on, you're really detached as a show caller from what's happening on stage. But that doesn't mean that you're not useful, because as soon as you start to hear people kind of panicking or going off script or things starting to need to change on the fly, you can really ascertain just by listening and being calm whether things might be working in the wrong direction or whether people might be working against themselves because they didn't think of this or that. You can kind of be really useful in that situation as well.
I think with what you've said previously about breaking the rules and now all this conversation on SOPs and whether we follow or not and what happens, who we trigger, who we don't trigger when we follow the SOP or we call a certain procedure, it's also the importance of revising those documents and making sure all our information and documentation and our procedures and our trainings and safety scenarios and everything is up to date to what we do and the different variables that we can get. Is it a show with 3 performers on stage? Is it 2? Is it 10? Is this version A, version B, version C of the show? So where are we at that point? But yeah, so are there times where you wish you know or had some training in psychology, since you are the one that is conducting the show, so to speak?
I love this question. This is a good one. I actually applied for psychology for university. It was my number one on my application. I knew I wasn't going because I had this other thing lined up, but it was number one on it. I was always really, really fascinated in kind of how we think and kind of the documented study of the human mind. You know, there's a lot of other studies of the human mind that are a lot more abstract or say spiritual, but this kind of more of the scientific and clinical approach, I guess, really kind of really triggered something in me. I think a kind of a basic understanding of psychology is actually really accessible, and I would really encourage everyone to kind of to look into that, because I think there's an element of self-reflection in the practice of psychology, in terms of, you're the individual that's interacting with the other, and kind of knowing that first is really beneficial. So it's kind of having a deeper training or understanding of it. I think, yeah, I've always wanted to kind of know more, and I guess that's inspired me to follow other little paths in my spare time to expand my knowledge on society and humans, I guess, whether it's like really reading different kinds of religious material to kind of understand cultural cross sections a little bit better, or just to kind of expand my mind there, or whether it's more like introspective and spiritual knowledge for myself, or more kind of new age conceptual thinking to enhance the way that I can kind of think about myself, I guess.
Sounds like we should come up with a psychology course for stage management and technicians, or live entertainment people.
Oh, brilliant. It could just be a little module, a little module in the course.
Well, we all work with people, right? And the success of a show relies on people coming together, and the depth and breadth of that psychology, and I've seen it in good shows and bad shows. I am a firm believer that the quality of the end product is dependent on a cohesive and collaborative team. And I'm just actually reading the book, The Song of Spider-Man. Have you read that?
No, right. What's that?
Oh, it's about the Broadway show with that didn't go so well, and I'll send you the details. You should read the blurb, but it's already hilarious, and it's written from the point of view of the writer, and it has because they worked with U2 and Julie Taymor. And it goes through this bumbling sort of way that the show is being put together, and you can see the train wreck coming, from a mile away. And from his perspective, I guess, maybe it may speak out of turn because people may think very differently of me, but especially when they talk about, having done all of the automation and all of the circus stuff that we've done, when you look at the way they were approaching some of the things they were doing in the Spider-Man show on a Broadway show, I mean, it was so ambitious. And
okay.
And also personal relationships come into play with that, and it's so interesting. You would really, really, really enjoy it, I think. I was on the ferry yesterday just giggling at the whole it was fantastic. So I feel that. Sorry, go ahead, Anna. Oh, really? I'd like to see it. I'm gonna have to look that up. But yeah, and it's a big conversation for me as well, especially here in Asia. There's not to go off topic too much, but it's important to make good products, and it's important to have a good team. And a lot of the time, there's a lot of Chinese investors looking to make big shows in this part of the world, and they're pulling a team together without understanding the nuances of what it takes to make a quality team, and are those right people in the right positions. And so the end result becomes quite. And then there's a lot of influence and control about the funding that comes into that, and how and their creative input, and really. It's a minefield. And so always at the center of any show, stage management, they're not seen as the designer, and they're not seen as the director, and they're not seen as the star on stage, but they're always a conduit in that mix. And it is a very important conduit, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And I think as well, like that I guess that I find that remark gets used quite often in terms of like the stage manager of this kind of, something like, if you don't hear or see the stage manager, they're doing their job kind of idea, like the not see, not heard, everything's running smoothly, and that's kind of to their credit. I think there's a lot of people that kind of really do value and respect stage managers, and really do kind of vocalize that on a daily basis too. I think there's a lot of times where people kind of are really grateful and really thankful that you're around and you're contributing. But I do sometimes think that there's a bit of a very kind of slippery slope, that we sometimes fall into this kind of category of being underappreciated, or kind of not having people really know the worth of our contribution or something like that. I think it's something that's felt probably amongst everyone that's backstage, to be honest, but not just stage managers. But I think it's kind of like bringing this into the concept of psychology. It's all connected. Kind of having this, I guess, having this intrinsic knowledge of how you operate and how you're triggered by certain things, and where you find that you're kind of, when your dark thoughts creep in, or where you start to lose a bit of confidence in yourself, or where you do feel yourself kind of buckling a bit, understanding when that's happening and why that's happening, and then having the answers to rebuttal that in the moment and say, actually, no, like I am really valued. People are really grateful that I'm here. There's so much that I do contribute. There's so much that I bring to this table, is kind of, I guess, kind of taking that from a psychological perspective has kind of been a lot more beneficial for me personally, and just to combat the like mini burnouts that happen here and there just from being frazzled sometimes, because it just happens.
What do you like most about the job? I like the pregnant pause before the answer of this question.
It's necessary because what do I like about it? I think because I really, really like to be helpful. I really like being useful, I guess. And that's in my personal life, in just with the people around me and the friends that I have and family and all this. And I like being helpful in some way. And I guess on top of that, I really like intellectualizing things. I love being a critical thinker, and I love when I get a piece of information. I almost never believe anything first up when it's offered to me. I'm kind of in really, really deep skeptic in a way. And I guess that mixed with this need and craving to be useful and helpful are just two things that are super satisfied by this job. It's almost like it almost is kind of like it really allows me to be the person that I want to be. It's actually more than the job itself. It's what the job offers me as a human being. It allows me to, really challenges me to always practice compassion, to like always really, really put myself in other people's shoes and see where they're coming from. And it really trains me to not be so sensitive as well, and not take criticism of a product as a direct impact, a direct reflection of my worth as a human. And that's really challenging, especially when that comes a lot when things are going wrong. For example, like being in a tough market weather-wise, where the tent temperature is just up and down in every corner of the tent, from the dressing rooms to front of house, and understanding the kind of difficulties and the difficulties that people experience while they're trying to do something acrobatic on stage, when the weather really affects that, and then knowing that I'm doing my best but not being able to control the weather. Same as the site crew, they're all doing their best, and having the opportunity as well to see that everyone really is trying their best. There's no one that kind of sets out in the morning to say, I'm going to bring this show down today. Like, no one's really I don't think anyone's doing that. Maybe there are people that I think maybe there's one person that I've met that was like that a long time ago. But I don't think that's definitely not the norm. Most of the people are somewhere because in entertainment, I'd like to believe they're there because they're passionate about it and they want to contribute and they want to do well. And being able to see that all of the time also kind of makes me more hopeful as a person too. So I think it's very selfish what I love about this job. It really is all of the personality quirks to it when it's being practiced the way that I believe an effective stage manager practices, which is kind of this more of a cooperative, collaborative leader in a way.
There's a lot of talk in stage management circles about the sort of the term servant leadership. So where you serve all of these departments, but you're actually a leader. And I really like that concept, because I think it comes from a place of humbleness, But I also wanted to point out that I really like you're a skeptic and you're very critical about every process. And I noticed that about you when I worked with you, how like whatever anything was put out, you'd sit back and you'd think about it first. You're like, actually, you can see that mind process going through your mind whenever you're like, but in that, the two things I also want to say that what is wonderful about that reflex is when you ask that question, it's like, well, why do we do it that way? A lot of those, from somebody who built the show and then it's forged in fire, right? Like you build a show and you just go in that direction until it's done. And some of those processes is not always the best process. So when you got somebody coming in and going, well, could we do it differently? Yeah, we could. How about this way? And it's such a beneficial, and the department grew over time and it became better and better, and not because of anything that I brought to it. It's because of all the things that the people who came into the department brought to the show. And then the second thing I want to say on that, there's two ways to do that. To question things can be done in a very negative way and can be perceived in a negative way, but in terms of a maturity and question things in a way that is not deemed threatening to the team around them, that's an approach, right? And takes some maturity from the person's point of view to introduce that new concept without other people getting defensive, or well, you're doing it the wrong way, or why are we doing it this way? That approach is also a very sensitive thing, and I think you do that really well, even if it's kind of frustrating because you're like, damn it, he's right.
For sure. And I think the reason that it can be frustrating is this might be a massive generalization that I'm about to go down the path of. Maybe I shouldn't. But what I notice is that sometimes people might think that what I think when we're having a conversation with someone, when we're questioning something that someone's giving us, for example, what we're talking about now, it's like the frustration arises when either party kind of doesn't understand the other's intentions. So kind of because of the way that I work is very, very similar to the way that I am. I am very curious about the world. I challenge everything. I challenge my parents. I've always challenged my parents. I challenge authority, not in a negative way, but like definitely in a way that kind of, when I see that something is unjust or not right, I at least want to understand it before I submit to it. So it's kind of, the journey for me is really important in all of my interactions, I guess, in society. And so that people know that about me. So I think that when I do come with some questions and when I question a product or a process, it's not really taken in a negative way. It may be because I'm who I am, but I think it's also kind of I'm quite transparent with my intentions. I do kind of vocalize my passion in the project that I'm on, and I do kind of vocalize my frustrations as well, but in a very kind of rationalized and packaged way. When I share moments of defeat, I can at the same time share what's going to take me out of that. I bring like a full conversation when I'm speaking to someone. I kind of have it all there, kind of, and I hash it out with that person as well. And I think some people that might be a little bit more reserved, which is not necessarily a bad thing, their comments and their resistance or their questioning of things might be seen as resistance because they're not so transparent with their intentions, because either they don't know how to be or they don't want to be. And that's just a different style for them. And that's just who they are. And they kind of we might have this attitude of, well, I'll rise above the way that I'm taken. But that's I think a really challenging path as a stage manager, because you're talking to different kinds of people every 2 minutes. And it's mostly about important information that you need to retain. So it's kind of like, it's a bit of an uphill battle, I think, taken from that. We do have to kind of, I think, concede that we have certain flaws and faults, and that might be the way that we communicate, and really endeavor to change that just for the harmony of, for our inner self and the harmony of the environment that we have to lead.
No, I think you're right. I think because you were known to, I remember having equally heated discussions over an SOP, as well as larger topics of the world of climate change.
Oh, for sure, right?
and racism and politics, and everything. So the level of debate didn't stop within the department. It went right up to global. I mean, I think we solved all the world's issues from the little corner in the cow, although we couldn't do anything about it.
I saw a meme or a post the other day online, which was like, just replace everyone in like Parliament politicians with stage managers. I was like, I'm not too sure. It depends who.
So would you change anything then, either from stage management world or the live entertainment world?
This is a good question too. This one's a hard one. I think I immediately go to this place of like, well, it doesn't really matter what I'd want to change because I'll only change what I'm in control of. Like this automatic like defensive-ness to the question because it's loaded. There's a lot of stuff that goes right and a lot of stuff that goes wrong. So it's kind of that's where I approach the question from a place of a bit uneasiness. But I think that's totally fine. That's how we grow. I think my experience as a GSM has kind of and seeing how I guess the role, watching how the role was fleshed out in my previous job in Macau, and then actually acting in the role in Cirque on a big top touring show. Specifically for the GSM role, something that I've thought about is I do feel like there needs to be a bit more of an elevation in terms of the knowledge that they're given. In general stage management, the knowledge that they kind of should be privy to, I think should be more. I think GSM should sit in on meetings of like upper management discussions, like the AD and the TD, and kind of even bigger, depending on whether the show is co-owned or where it exists. If there is a meeting that is above the general stage manager, I do feel like they should be included because they're in such a vital position to kind of steer things steadily and as easily and as smoothly and hopefully without incident as well. That more information, the better, because just because I'm getting all of this information doesn't mean I'll drown in it. I'll filter out what I don't need. And I think that's kind of something that I've noticed from those two environments, just talking from those two environments, something I saw that could really benefit that role, is it being elevated in terms of like discretion and information.
Perhaps the other way too, you feeding information up on how the operation actually works. Because a lot of the time there can be, and I'm not particularly talking about the entities that you're talking about, maybe other shows I've worked on, but there's a disconnect between the people making the decisions on what's happening with the show and what's actually really happening on the ground. And again, from a conduit, but it also takes a certain type of person to be able to have the capacity, like we're talking about a very senior stage management position, having a capacity to step up and understand, because you've got to respect that, it's a business after all, not just creating art, and there's priorities. And sometimes hearing that information at the upper level can be personally on your own creative sort of heart saying this is the wrong way, right? But you have to take that from understanding and feeding up the importance of the things that you're doing. And I think that dialogue and you being in that position, if you're present in those meetings, is a two-way street, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of the time as well, actually, I don't know this. This is really just a potential assumption of that. There's, if for example, like between your immediate, I guess, superior in a way would be the artistic director working in the artistic division within stage management, if that's the setup, which it usually is. There's so much, again, coming from the place of wanting to be helpful and useful, there is so much that the artistic director needs to deal with that's larger than the show, because it's everything from market and kind of how the show's received, and they work in depth with like PR front of house, like that kind of stuff as well. There's so many other things going on rather than just the artistic integrity of the show. When your information is passed on to them, they're filtering your information that's really only necessary to pass on to the people that he or she, the AD, needs to pass on. And I think kind of elevating that GSM role definitely will kind of really like set individuals apart in terms of their qualifications, because a GSM in more of that senior role, as you described it, definitely is a different kind of person than someone who's just a GSM on the show and doesn't worry about or doesn't need to worry about that kind of upper level stuff, even though it may be beneficial to their own productivity. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because it is a bit of a double-edged sword, because then it kind of, I guess, introduces other necessary levels for people to potentially be more involved in the production. I guess that's when you put in deputies and leads and that kind of stuff. So you kind of may need to jig with the format. I don't know. That was the first thing that came to mind, though, when I thought about the question. I guess other things is generally, I think if a show is big enough and it warrants it, there should be some in-house some kind of in-house counseling available, even like once or twice a week on site, something like that people can like freely sign up at a green room or a kitchen and throw their names down. And it's almost like the way that, shows have a Pilates instructor come in for 3 hours on a Wednesday afternoon kind of thing. It could kind of be a similar gig for someone that works with mental health. Because I think even though there are lots of organizations out there that people can reach out to, people do not do it. I don't think people really utilize the tools that are available to them. And I don't know whether it's out of laziness or just putting it on the back burner. Yeah, I'll get to it. I'll get to it when I have a meltdown kind of vibe. Like, I don't know what it is, but I don't know if people are really pursuing these things. I know I have personally, like when I've kind of hit rocky times, I've used BetterHelp because it was an app and it was international and it worked with the different time zones of touring. So that was really great when I kind of decided to kind of reach out, and that was awesome. But I think on-site mental health in some capacity for larger shows would be a really great move. I say that because when I was on Volta and we had the tragic fatality of an artist, that's the support that we were given on tour. We were in Tampa and they had very, very quickly a mental health professional like grieving counselor come to site and work with everyone and be available almost all of the time. And that was a really serious situation that definitely warranted that act. And it was great that Cirque facilitated that for us. But I really noticed then how valuable it was and how valuable it could be long term. Given that it can be afforded by the production. Like there's so many things that kind of the arts runs into in terms of what's feasible, that it's kind of sometimes a shame that things might not be as accessible as we'd like them to be.
I think that's an amazing answer, and I think breaking the stigma by putting it in part of the operations is part of it, right? And we train our physical bodies. Why would we not be training our mind as well? And for me it's one and the same, and especially you practice yoga and as well as I do, and it's all about this mind, body, spirit balance, and if you're training just your body and you're not cultivating your mind or your spirit, there's it's going to be on the long term you're starved in that aspect if you're not cultivating that as well. And I would really like to see that kind of change too, and to put somebody in that system as if it's a normal thing, like a coach or a trainer or a specialist thing. Like a physiotherapist for your body, you've got them on tour. Why don't you have a person that there's, because equally, I'm sure that there's ramifications of the mental health that have ramifications on the show. And wouldn't it be interesting if you put it on the show for like, say, one Cirque show for 12 months and see what the ramifications on staff retention, overall quality of show. Do you know what I mean? Like you could try and tangibly, because I'm a data person, right? Figure out what is the tangible difference that you can achieve by having somebody, and maybe that investment then comes in return. If you have to change 3-4 less people out of a show, I mean, that's casting, it's travel, it's visas, that could be one person's salary, right? So, it could balance out in that way. And it's, I'm gonna take that up. If I'm in an opportunity where that becomes a thing, I'm gonna put it in the budget.
Yeah, awesome. For sure.
I wonder if there's like any dance companies or any other kind of tours or companies in general that have done it. Maybe people listen to that and they have it in place and they can tell us what their experience is.
Yeah, amazing. That would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if anyone listening has an experience of that, please let us know. We'd love to talk to you.
For sure. Excellent.
Oh, this has been great. Thank you very much, Nathan. It's been good to talk to you and learn from you and hear all your experience, all the time you're sharing with us. That's amazing. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. It's been really, really great. It's always a blessing to have a yarn with Anna, and meeting a new friend named Anna is fantastic too.
Likewise. Thank you.
Thanks for your time, Nathan.
Thanks.
Please write a review on our podcast whenever you listen to our podcast and let your friends know about us. You can learn more about Theatre Art Life by visiting our website at www.theatreartlife.com. And you can follow us on social media and leave your questions or comments on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Pinterest, Twitter, or YouTube. We really want to thank David Zieher for composing the music for our podcast, and Michelle Sciarrotta, who is our sound engineer. We are your hosts, Anna and Anna, and this is the Theatre Art Life podcast, where we put the spotlight on those who create live entertainment around the world.